Hi, I want to my name is Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt. I'm the chairman of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, and I welcome you to our conversation today. Yesterday, I had the privilege of interviewing Tom Nides, former U.S. ambassador to Israel from 2021 to 2023, and he spoke on behalf of the Harris Walls campaign. As part of the ZRC's mission to promote unity, understanding, and cooperation between the Jewish communities of Israel and the diaspora, the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition is pleased to present today's conversation with a senior advisor in the Trump-Vance campaign. The ZRC is the nonpartisan, multi-denominational, non-denominational voice of Zionist rabbis. Consequently, our conversation yesterday as well as today will present a unique focus on the specific question of how American Jews should cast their vote in the upcoming presidential election. Or, as my grandmother used to always ask, is it good for the Jews? For those of us who care about the fate of the Jewish state, which presumably is everyone both on this call and those who are watching the video of it, we're following the candidates, their statements and policies with heightened interest. And with the election so close and so much at stake in terms of Israel's fate, the Jewish vote, especially in swing states, could be critical and could make the difference between who gets elected and who is not. Our call today is being recorded, and like yesterday's call, will be posted on our website, zionisrabbis.org, shortly after the conclusion of our conversation. So today we have with us Ellie Cohanim. Ellie arrived as, or she pronounced it Cohanim. I wanted to ask which is the correct way. But at any rate, Ellie arrived as a child refugee to the United States after she and her family fled the escalating anti-Semitism in Iran during the Islamic Revolution in 1979. She went on to become the State Department's first Iranian board envoy, and she served as Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism in the Trump administration, working side by side with Ilan Carr. In that capacity, as Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, she was the lead official in diplomatic initiatives, which resulted in groundbreaking partnerships in the Arab world, combating anti-Semitism, which were part of the groundbreaking Abraham Accords. Ellie is the author of the chapter on Israel and the Middle East in an America First approach to United States national security. It's co-chair of the National Task Force on Anti-Semitism, which brings together some 90 Christian Jewish policymaking organizations to combat Jew hatred in America. She, needless to say, has a special expertise on Iran, Middle East peace, global anti-Semitism. Some of you may recognize and know her from her appearances on national television, as well as the show that she hosted on the Jewish News Syndicate, JNS. Finally, Ellie has served on boards of the American Jewish Committee, the New York Jewish Community Relations Council, her Hadassah chapter, and recently joined the International Board of the Governors of Jewish Jaffe, the Jewish Agency for Israel. Of special interest to our rabbis on the call, she held executive roles at Yeshiva University, the Jewish Theological Seminary, as well as UJ Federation of New York. So welcome, Ellie, to our call today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt. Thank you so much for having me, for that warm introduction. I so much appreciate it. And your friendship, and also the Zionist Rabbinic Council for hosting what I believe is an important series of conversations at this election season. So thank you again. In answering the question that was posed to all of us, who should Jewish Americans vote for? I think the most logical way to answer that question, of course, is to compare the track records of former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris in office. Compare their track records on foreign policy, on domestic policy as it relates to Jewish Americans. And so I'm going to jump right into it, Rabbi, if I may.
Please, yes.
Great. And so when I compare those track records objectively, there's no question in my mind that American Jews should not only be voting for Donald Trump, but they should be running to the polls and grabbing all of their Jewish friends and together voting for Donald J. Trump for president. Here's a replay of Donald Trump's track record in his 4 years in office. As it relates to Israel, Donald Trump will go down in history as the most pro-Israel, most philo-Semitic president in American history, with hopefully himself to compete with as the 47th president. Trump recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people, and he therefore moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, talked to the IDF today on how strategically important the Golan Heights are for Israeli security. Back in 2018, Trump defunded UNRWA, the same UNRWA that Israel has now documented its employees as participating in the October 7th massacre. Trump set US policy that Israel's West Bank settlements are not, quote, inconsistent with international law per se. Contrast this with the Biden administration, which is today, right now, sanctioning Israelis. And when it came to foreign policy, what we saw with President Trump was that he created peace through strength. He supported our allies and he contained our adversaries. Now, this is nowhere more clear than President Trump's Iran policy. Trump is clear-eyed on the Iranian threat. He does not believe in a policy of appeasement towards the Islamic Republic regime, which poses an existential threat to Israel, something that I hope all of us by now understand, that when the Islamic Republic says that they want to eliminate Israel, they mean what they say. With Trump, we saw the maximum pressure campaign waged against Iran, which was the strongest sanctions campaign in history. And in addition to that, when Trump believed that kinetic pressure was necessary, he used it, as we saw in the elimination of the IRGC head Qasem Soleimani. So President Trump left the Islamic Republic of Iran bankrupt, weak, and cornered by the end of his 4 years. And it was Trump's Iran policy which naturally led to his brokering of the Abraham Accords, the first peace deals in the region in, at that time, 26 years, peace between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and Kingdom of Morocco. And Trump told us that there were 8 more countries ready to make peace with Israel at the end of his term. And I am certain, and I'm going to repeat that, I am certain that if we have President Trump back in the Oval Office, we will achieve peace between Israel and the holder of Islam, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is an absolute historic game changer in the region. Try to understand what that means when the holder of Islam, the country where Mecca and Medina are located, when that country makes peace with Israel, it gives a kosher certification to all other Muslim countries to follow suit. Trump should have received the Nobel Prize for the Abraham Accords because they were also warm peace deals. They were peace deals that led to people ties, full diplomatic relations, in contrast to the cold peace that we have with Jordan and Egypt and Israel. Now, I want to pivot from President Trump's track record on Israel to his track record on anti-Semitism. As Rabbi, you mentioned, I had the honor and privilege of serving under President Trump as his deputy special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. First, I think we all have to give thanks and gratitude to the Trump administration for being the first administration to staff up that office by bringing in a deputy envoy. Previously, that office had always been just one envoy and one and a half civil servant offices. But also the administration understood, and they sought out a Jew from the Middle East, myself, because they understood, and I understand, that the greatest threat that Jews around the world are facing right now is the alliance between the left and radical Islam. And I, in my own lifetime, as you detailed, Rabbi, as a child, I faced this threat. I lost my home and I lost my homeland due to this very threat, and I understand this threat in my bones. So as it came to anti-Semitism policy, President Trump set the policy of our administration that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. And let us be clear, this is the battle that we are waging today in a post-October 7th world, where we Jews are daily being attacked, assaulted, harassed by those who hate the very existence of Israel. And in the fight against anti-Semitism, President Trump made history when in 2019, he issued the executive order combating anti-Semitism, which for the first time in American history gave American Jews Title VI protection under the civil rights law. This executive order by President Trump is the very reason that today our Jewish college students have a legal pathway to hold their universities accountable for the pro-Hamas Jew hate that has overtaken our campuses. If it were not for President Trump's executive order, our students today would have no legal recourse right now. Think about that. So to review the Trump track record, you had a president who showed unprecedented support for Israel, recognizing Jerusalem as its capital, as Israel's capital, the Golan Heights taking on the Iranian threat, defunding UNRWA, brokering peace between Israel and the Arab countries, setting U.S. policy that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, issuing the executive order combating anti-Semitism. Now I want to turn to the Kamala Harris four-year track record in contrast. We have, first of all, the October 7 massacre and Hamas war on Israel, followed by Hezbollah entering the war against Israel, followed by Iran from its homeland for the first time in history entering the war against Israel. And of course, this entire war is an Iranian war against Israel. What has been Kamala Harris's track record during this war, and how did we get here in the first place? Well, the Biden-Harris administration, immediately upon entering office, stopped enforcing the Trump administration's sanctions on Iran. Specifically, they have allowed oil sales from Iran to China from one adversary to the other. And according to Ioanni, Iran has made over $80 billion to $100 billion in oil sales since Joe Biden came into office. And we all know what Iran does when they have money, when they have revenue. They fund their terror proxies. When President Trump says that October 7th would never have happened if he were president, what does he mean by that? Well, firstly, that the Iranians would have had the resources to wage a seven-front war against Israel. They would not have had those resources, and they didn't under Trump. But also, and significantly, the U.S. deterrence shield worked under Trump, and it clearly failed under Biden-Harris. Let's stay on this for a moment. A lot of people don't like President Trump's personality, but what they don't get is we don't need a president who's likable. We need a president who's feared by our adversaries and our enemies, and that is certainly the case with Donald Trump. I want to move again, so let me just say it. The U.S. security deterrence umbrella failed under Biden-Harris. Now, moving on with Kamala Harris's track record since October 7th. First of all, she tells us that the pro-Hamas, pro-jihadis who have waged a nationwide intimidation campaign against American Jews on our city streets and our college campuses. The folks who in Los Angeles committed a pogrom in June, attacking a synagogue and the entire Jewish neighborhood of Pico Robertson, while police stood down because the local Democrat authorities apparently told them to stand down. The pro-Hamas mobs who have threatened, harassed, and intimidated Jews inside the Nova Music Festival memorial exhibition. The pro-Hamas mobs who in Washington, D.C. pulled down the American flag and burned it while hoisting a Palestinian flag in its place. What does Kamala Harris have to say about these people? She says, quote, they are showing exactly what the human emotion should be as a response to Gaza, unquote. In early June, Harris mourned the, quote, tragic loss of innocent Gazans killed in the heroic June 8 IDF raid that rescued 4 Israeli hostages, including the hostage Noah Argamani. Who can forget the image of when they kidnapped Noah that day? Harris has slammed Israel for what she considers insufficient humanitarian efforts and unnecessary restrictions on aid delivery in Gaza, treating a modern-day blood libel against Israel, that somehow Israel is starving Gazans, that somehow there's a famine in Gaza. All meanwhile, every day Israel's Kogat shows us on social media the tons and tons of food and humanitarian aid and medical aid that Israel is allowing into Gaza. Every day Kogat is showing us that, and yet Kamala Harris is feeding into a modern-day blood libel against Israel. Kamala Harris has also incessantly and nonstop called for, quote, an immediate ceasefire in Israel's defensive war, especially at the inflection points when it seems that Israel might be winning in the seven-front existential war that she's fighting. Harris refused to attend Netanyahu's address to Congress, opting instead to go to a sorority event, and she refused to do a joint press conference with Netanyahu afterwards. And here's perhaps one of the most important points for consideration for us. Kamala Harris and this administration have tied Israel's hands behind their back with threats on Israel, threats from entering Rafah, amazingly, the same exact location where Israel eliminated Yahya Sinwar, where we know that Sinwar had a ring of Israeli hostages around him for almost a year. Okay, that same location, Rafah, is where Kamala Harris threatened Israel in March that if they entered Rafah, quote, she had not, quote, not ruled out consequences. Why? Because she had studied the maps. Throughout this war, what we've seen from the Biden-Harris administration is this administration tying Israel's hands behind their backs, threatening Israel, pressuring Israel, and refusing to rearm and resupply Israel with the munitions that they desperately need to get the job done. Kamala Harris and this administration have dragged the war out. They've cost thousands of Palestinian lives and Israeli lives. And even this last week with the Israeli operation against Iran, which poses, again, an existential threat against Israel, Joe Biden went on the record and said Israel should not target Iran's nuclear sites or its oil sites, which therefore the Israelis did avoid. I want to also quickly mention the intelligence leak that we saw from our intelligence agencies last week, revealing Israel's attack plans against Iran. And the fact that there are so many pro-Iran and pro-Hamas people in the Biden-Harris administration that we can't even point fingers at who this might be. But let us remember, starting with their disgraced Iran envoy, Rob Malley, who is still under FBI investigation, lost his security clearance, and Republicans in Congress still can't get an answer from this administration what is happening with Rob Malley, to the Iranian regime-tied Ariana Tabataei, who has access to the highest classified information at Department of Defense, to Maher Bitar, who is a former leader of Students for Justice in Palestine and serves as director of intelligence programs at the National Security Council. As they say in DC, personnel is policy. Vote for Kamala Harris, get more of the same personnel in office. And Rabbi, I just want to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand. I'm wrapping up, I promise. I want to just turn our attention to the issue of anti-Semitism, and this is where I will come to an end. Under the Biden-Harris administration, what we've experienced as American Jews under this administration is not rising anti-Semitism, but a historically unprecedented 400% surge in anti-Semitic incidents and attacks against American Jews since October 7th. And this is all under the watch of Biden and Harris. So here is the bottom line question for American Jews right now. This election is not an election where we ask ourselves, oh, should I vote for the Republican candidate for president or should I vote for the Democrat candidate for president? What we're dealing with right now is unprecedented tsunami of anti-Semitism in the United States. And American Jews must make this election a referendum on anti-Semitism. We need to vote against those people who are in office right now, the people who have the power to bring an end to the pro-Hamas anti-Semitism, which has swept through this country, but they are refusing to do so. American Jews need to wake up and take a lesson from our British counterparts, who under Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, they walked away from the Labour Party to send a message to that party. This is the moment we're finding ourselves in American history right now. American Jews must do the same. They must, at least for this one election, walk away from the Democratic Party and send the message loud and clear, make it a referendum to the powers that be. If you want to tolerate Jew hate, if you want to let pro-Hamas demonstrators run wild on our campuses and our city streets, if you want to let a Jewish man, Paul Kessler, be killed in Los Angeles at a pro-Hamas rally and not even designated as a hate crime, if you want to open the southern border and allow in a West African migrant who this last Shabbat shot at a Jewish man on his way to the synagogue while shouting Allah Akbar and not consider it a hate crime, go ahead. If you want 4 more years of that, then go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris. But again, we are at a crossroads in American history right now. If you want a president in office who will protect American Jews and provide for Israeli security, then vote for Donald Trump.
Thank you, Ellie. You certainly passionately made the case for Donald Trump, as Ambassador Knives did yesterday on behalf of the Harris campaign. So now let me get to some of the tough questions. Let me preface it by saying that I think that there's no question about the pro-Israel aspects of President Trump's presidency and his administration. But I want to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that there are so many who, while approving and supporting all of these things that you have alluded to, nevertheless are very deeply concerned by many aspects of things that President Trump has either said or said that he will do or has done. So let's go right into it, and that is many attribute that the rise in anti-Semitism directly to President Trump's administration and his presidency, that the way in which he spoke about immigrants, about Latinos, about others, and so on, really kind of opened up a right-wing kind of hate fest. And so you were there at Madison Square Garden last night, which is the other night, I understand, which is most recent example of the kinds of things that were coming out of the campaign, out of those who were supporters of the campaign, and so on. So let's deal with this, and then there are some sub questions to that. But just in general, what about that tremendous concern that people have about the way, I don't know how to describe the way in which he speaks so disparagingly, so negatively, and how that may contribute to this atmosphere in which anti-Semitism becomes more palatable and acceptable.
Well, I have seen nothing in President Trump that would tie to anti-Semitic attitudes. And I can tell you, Rabbi, that I was at Madison Square Garden, but not only on Sunday, not only was I at Madison Square Garden, the Jewish Coalition for Trump had seven suites filled with Jews of every variety, visibly visible Jews, secular Jews, you name it, every kind of Jew. We had 7 suites in Madison Square Garden. And then we had all the thousands of regular American Jews who came to Madison Square Garden with regular seats. And we've all seen the footage on social media. They were waving Israeli flags. They were donning their tefillin. It was like just a love fest, okay? And the thing about it, Rabbi, is that American Jews need to understand that the information that you get right now is really important to look at your sources of information. If you're watching CNN and MSNBC, which MSNBC literally compared this Trump rally at MSG to the Nazi rally in the 1930s, I mean, these people have got to be kidding me. Again, I cannot reiterate how many thousands of Jews there were at this rally. Openly proud Jews, waving Israeli flags, again, donning tefillin. I mean, it is just so obnoxious, but also dangerous of MSNBC to be making a claim like that, because, Rabbi, what they're doing is that they are engaging in Holocaust denial. You know, if you compare anyone to Adolf Hitler, who is not, you know, exterminating 6 million Jews, then what you've done for the younger generation who's so ignorant about Holocaust history is you've made them think that you know, like anyone is Hitler. They don't understand who Hitler is, because the media constantly tries for 10 years now to frame Donald Trump in this way.
But,
And if you hold on, Rabbi, if you call the MSG rally a Nazi rally when it was a Jew-loving fest, if anything, then you're misleading millions of Americans. And so it's you know, it's vile. It's really vile, and it belittles the memory of the Holocaust. It misleads people. And all I can say, Rabbi, is that people are very misled by these notions.
But there are aspects in which he himself has raised this in terms of his feeling about strong leaders, whether it's dictators, whether it's Putin or others. Just apparently last week, there was a comment that he would, and it may, again, be misinterpreted, whatever, but that he would like generals like Hitler's generals.
Right, Rabbi. So that was not verified. You know, The Atlantic, first of all, we know that the owner of The Atlantic has a cozy relationship with Kamala Harris. She's apparently one of her closest friends going back years and years. All of this information is publicly available. I really encourage everyone to go do your research. The other thing about that Atlantic story is that there's no verified sources. And in fact, I myself on my social media put up a lot of people who are in the administration at the same time who are disputing this version of events. So the Atlantic has no further corroboration on what they're saying, that
Just
this
one person who said it.
accusation. Right. The one person, right? But there's been no corroboration on this one person who also happens to have an axe to grind with Donald Trump because he was fired by Trump. Also, people need to ask themselves, when these stories come out like 2 weeks before election day, are you really going to believe that there's no political agenda there? This man has had so many years to come forward with his accusations against Trump, and he happens to bring it forward 2 weeks before an election. And the Atlantic, which has its own history of literally the best friend of Kamala Harris, is the owner. They published this without any further corroboration. Would they ever publish a story like that without corroboration for a Democrat? So you know what? I don't believe it. I think it's garbage. I think it's political trash nonsense in the lead up to elections. And Rabbi, again, I want to go back to what I was saying earlier, because I myself escaped a country which turned overnight because of anti-Semitism. This election is a crossroads. We are facing a 400% increase in anti-Semitism, a tsunami of anti-Semitism in this country. American Jews have a choice to make. Wake up and be clear-eyed at the choice you have in front of you. There are people who are in power today. That's Kamala Harris. She's the one who's the vice president right now. She is not stopping the pro-Hamas anti-Semitism that's taken over this country. In fact, she's feeding it. So if you vote for that, then just imagine what happens to this country in 2 years from now, what happens in 4 years from now. Are our children going to be safe? Are we going to be safe? Do our grandchildren have a future in this country? And sadly, I think the answer is no. So don't be distracted by all this nonsense. Don't let the noise get to you. Be clear-eyed about the choice that you have in front of you right now.
Let me continue with this line of questioning a little bit more.
Sure.
At a recent conference of the IAC, the Israel American Coalition, when he made a comment there, and I heard the comment saying that if he loses, it will be because Jews do not support him. Now, I happen to hear the comment, I think is trying to say just in terms of trying to encourage Jews to support him. But one of the concerns is in terms of his supporters on the right may interpret this, if he does happen to lose the election, it was the Jews. In other words, that kind of thing might people may feel feeds into some of this potential outpouring of anti-Semitism. Any concerns on your part about that? Or how would you answer?
I have no concern. And what I believe President Trump is referring to is, Rabbi, what you kind of opened up with, which is that in swing states like Pennsylvania and other very important swing states, this election is riding on just such a small sliver of undecided voters and hopefully some Democrats who will flip Republican, because again, as American Jews, you understand that your own personal safety and security of yourself and your family is on the line. And so, that is the truth. American Jews could actually swing this election. And so my hope, again, is that American Jews will swing this election. They will make this a referendum on the status quo and reject the status quo.
One last question in this area of anti-Semitism.
Sure.
President Biden said that he decided to enter the race because of the comments in Charlottesville. And I don't want to rehash old history again, but many people still are concerned about what Trump said at that time when he said there's good on both sides.
Rabbi, thank you for raising this question, because back in 2019, I wrote an op-ed about this in Newsweek. I encourage everyone to go ahead and read it. And what I debunked, but also, if you don't want to believe Ellie Cohanim, go to Snopes. Snopes has debunked this Charlottesville hoax, okay? And basically what President Trump was talking about at that time, and the video exists, so you can just, Google the video and watch the entire clip. Because what Joe Biden and others have done is they've taken what Trump said, which is he was talking about the protesters who had come to Charlottesville protesting against the removal of American Confederate statues, right? And what Trump was saying is that on that issue of removing U.S. historical figure statues, that there were good people on both sides of that question. And he went on to say, but I am not speaking about the white supremacists who should be completely demonized and rejected. I mean, he says all of this, it's on the record, it's on the video. I reject them, I denounce them, they should be completely denounced. So he's talking about a conversation about American historical figures removing those statues. And what's happened is that what the media did is they took that clip of Trump and they cut off the end of it where he says, I am not talking about the white supremacists. And they've put it out into the ether. And unfortunately, I think that this has misguided so much of American Jewry now for so many years. Again, Trump has, I think there's evidence, there's recordings of him. Again, I encourage everyone to go do your own research. Over 50 times that he's denounced white supremacists.
So that comment then was referring to the controversy about the Confederate statues, is what you're saying.
Confederate statues, exactly.
So let me move beyond this a little bit. We'll come back to it, but that is Senator Vance, the Republican vice presidential nominee, said in an interview just the other day on the Tom Dillon podcast that pro-Israel Americans responded in a much more militaristic way to October 7th than Israelis, and argued that Israel's interests sometimes may conflict with those of the United States. So the question I have has to do with, given the fact that there certainly is a growing isolationist trend within the Republican Party, and that there are those, for example, who do not want to see aid given to Ukraine or elsewhere, and yet still there obviously is strong support for Israel. How's that going to play out? Is there going to be a pull on isolationism, and is that in fact going to have a negative effect on support and aid for Israel?
So, Rabbi, thank you for this question. And if you listen to the rest of what J.D. Vance said in that interview, he said he doesn't think it's in the American interest for America to go to war against Iran. Okay, that is where he went with the end of that argument. And here's the reality. You know, just last night, I'm on the board of the Iranian American Jewish Federation, and last night we had former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett come to speak to us. And in that conversation, Naftali Bennett said that he understands that Israeli interests and American interests don't always align, right? No two countries' interests always align. And J.D. Vance is simply pointing that fact out. And Vance is saying that he doesn't think it's in America's interest to go to war with Iran. And Naftali Bennett last night said, you know, we, Israel, don't need America to go to war with Iran. We need America to just support us. We're doing all the work, just support us. Resupply our weapons that we've been asking for. Resupply the JDAMs and the munitions that were that were either taken away before the October 7th attack started because the Biden administration actually pressured Israel to give all of the munitions that were stored in Israel to Ukraine. And since then, they've been, embargoing and holding back the munitions from Israel. So this is Naftali Bennett, a former Israeli prime minister himself, saying, one, he understands that American and Israeli interests don't always align. And anyone who knows, international relations knows that to be a fact. There's no two countries, even the United States and Canada's interests don't always align. But two, the Israelis are not asking America to go to war on their behalf, and that's what J.D. Vance was talking about. So I think.
So what about the bigger picture then about the isolationist trend within the Republican Party?
You know what, Rabbi? Look, I am not concerned about kind of like an isolationist trend, as you're calling it, because what I experienced myself in the Trump administration, again, we have a 4-year track record to look at, is that when President Trump and when Republicans feel that kinetic action is necessary, they take it. So we saw that with the elimination of Qasem Soleimani. We saw that with President Trump wiping out ISIS by using the mother of all bombs, the Moab bomb, within months of entering his administration. There's no President Trump and his administration have no qualms about using military might when necessary, and so I would expect that to continue as we go forward with the hopeful second Trump administration.
So I asked Ambassador Nyes yesterday about Kamala Harris standing up to the left and the squad within her party, and those forces. So I have to ask you, it's related to what we're talking about right now, but how will Donald Trump deal with extremists on the right in his party? Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Greene Taylor, and others. It's a subset of the question I've asked, but this aspect of advisors and or people pulling in a certain direction. There's concern in many quarters of the Jewish community about this aspect of President Trump's potential second term.
Right. Look, I can understand the concern, and I myself am not a fan of any of these people. And I know that Tucker Carlson, since he left Fox News, he seems to have a new funder who's Iranian, who has ties to the Iranian regime. I'm not sure if that information is widely known. But what I can tell you, Rabbi, is that U.S. policy under Donald Trump was determined by people who were in the administration. There was no outside advisors that were advising President Trump on domestic policy, on foreign policy. It was people inside the administration. And in the last administration, I'm sure the next administration would be the same. You had people like senior advisor to the president, Jared Kushner. You had people like R.E.A. Lightstone. You had people like Jason Greenblatt. You had people like Secretary Pompeo. I can go up and down the list of people in the previous administration who were strong Jewish supporters, strong allies of the Jewish people, and that is who I expect that President Trump will be restaffing his administration in a 47th presidency.
So so much of it does come down to, as you said before, people and personnel and personalities. After the last election, when Prime Minister Netanyahu made a call to congratulate President Biden on his election, there were reports that Mr. Trump was very upset about that, the fact that the call was made and things like that. So is there cause for concern about the nature of the personal relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu, and or should there be successors to Mr. Netanyahu? The personal chemistry there is one issue. And then secondly, what some people are concerned just about the fact that he may be so temperamental and so judging so subjectively that perhaps Israel could possibly suffer if there were ill will between the two.
Well, I think that the two gentlemen have moved well beyond that perhaps friction that existed some years ago, 4 years ago now, because we all can look at the footage of when Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the United States most recently and made his address to Congress, which I mentioned earlier. Kamala Harris boycotted. She refused to go to the address. She went and met with her sorority instead. And you can contrast that with President Trump, who warmly welcomed Prime Minister Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu to his own home to Mar-a-Lago. And anyone who watched the footage saw, you saw President Trump at the entrance of Mar-a-Lago. He comes, he literally hugs Netanyahu. At the end, they give each other like this big bro hug, and brings him and Sarah into Mar-a-Lago, and they had this warm discussion, and they did a joint press conference together. So clearly, the two world leaders are back in warm relations with each other, and I have no doubt that whether whatever duly elected Prime Minister of Israel is in office, President Trump will work very closely with them. And listen, Rabbi, I can't help but contrast that with the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, standing in Congress and calling for Netanyahu to resign.
So let me go back to somewhere where we had started in the outset, and that is, again, because as I listen to people and receive different questions from individuals, it still comes back to the personality and the concern about accepting the results of this election, as well as the past election. Concerns about whether or not there would be any threat to our democratic institutions with a second Trump administration. The threats to punish his enemies, to use various government agencies to take retribution. What could you say, Ellie, from your vantage point as someone involved in the campaign who has worked with President Trump, to, if there is anything can be said, to people who have those concerns?
Well, I understand why people have those concerns because the media has kind of like created this frenzy, and it's a Democrat talking point, threat to our democracy. What I find, Rabbi, though, rather ironic about this whole set of talking points is the fact that it is exactly what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have done to Donald Trump, that they're accusing Trump that he will somehow do if he comes into office. And so what I am referring to is the weaponization of our government agencies. The Democrats under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they have weaponized the Department of Justice. They have weaponized the attorney generals to bring all these false lawsuits, and they've used lawfare against Donald Trump. And then when they see that the lawfare doesn't work, then we see these threats on Trump's life. And 2 times there have been assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Okay. I mean, let's not forget that there are people who are actually trying to kill the man who's running for office, right? And where is Kamala Harris's FBI? Where are our Secret Service? How did they allow such a thing to happen? And we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran has threatened to kill Donald Trump. So how did they take these threats so unseriously that we almost lost, God forbid, we almost lost a candidate for the United States president, a former president of the United States. And the Iranians are still to this day targeting him. They're targeting Secretary Pompeo. They're targeting Brian Hook. I mean, I could go on. So, to me, the notion that the very people who have weaponized the DOJ, who have failed to provide security for a candidate for the presidency, who they themselves are the ones who need to be asked these questions. If Donald Trump wins this election, is Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, are they going to just peacefully step down? I certainly hope so.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other closing comments you want to share with us? I know you've got to leave shortly, and then afterwards, I invite the rabbis and individuals who are on the call to stay for the meeting in the parking lot afterwards. We had a conversation a little bit yesterday. But first of all, I want to thank you for your time, Ellie, as well as for your service on behalf of our country, on behalf of fighting and combating anti-Semitism, and the work you've done with the Abraham Accords and in other areas as well. So I want to give you the opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to closing comments. And again, I just can't emphasize enough how much we appreciate, but also the recognition that while there is much good, there also is much concern about some of these kinds of issues, specifically in terms of a graciousness, a gravitas, so to speak, accepting whether it's the results of the election or other means of aspects. And to the extent that you have any opportunity to speak with Mr. Trump, I've often said that it would be Derek Eretz that will make America great again. But Ellie, closing words, please.
Yeah, I mean, Rabbi, again, I want to emphasize to everyone that I believe that we're at a crossroads in American history right now. We have an unprecedented surge in anti-Semitism that's taken over our country. We've seen it. We've seen these pro-Hamas mobs walking through our streets, intimidating Jews, harassing Jews. It's a nationwide intimidation campaign, which has sadly left at least 2 Jews, one Jewish American, Paul Kessler, dead, another man in Chicago right now injured. And we have to ask ourselves where we want this country to be in 2 years from now and 4 years from now. And I have no doubt that if American Jews help to elect Kamala Harris, well, you're going to get more of the same. So expect more insecurity, more threats against Jews, more harassment, more Jews who are afraid of walking down our streets with a Magen David or a kippah on their heads. And frankly, I don't know if this will be a country that Jews can safely live in. And having escaped one country, I would hate to have to pack up my bags and leave another country. So that is what's at stake in this election. It's our own safety and security, and it's certainly the safety and security of the Jewish state of Israel. And again, let's put personalities aside. Let's look at policy. President Donald Trump has a 4-year track record for all of us to look at, and I've reviewed it in detail. And we know that Donald Trump, he provided safety for American Jews, and he provided security for the Jewish state of Israel. And I just am pleading with American Jews to kind of wake up and understand that this Democrat Party is not your grandfather's Democrat Party. The reason that you have people like Elon Musk, Bobby Kennedy Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard walk away from the Democrat Party, because what they're saying is, I didn't change, the party changed. And the Democrat Party is not your grandfather's Democrat Party any longer. They are not protecting Jews, and they are not supporting Israel. So there is a very warm home in the Republican Party for American Jews, and I hope that every single American Jew will mark my words and vote Donald Trump.
Thank you, Ellie, for such a wonderful explanation and passionate advocacy, just as yesterday with Ambassador Tom Nines. I invite everyone to please take advantage of the calls that we've had, as well as other material supplied by the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. Our website is very easy, zionistrabbis.org, and we look forward to the outcome of the election, and hopefully being able to find a way to be supportive of Israel as American Jews. So thank you very much, Ellie.
Thank you.